think that's working. I'm not able to see it, so I don't know. But anyways, I'm glad to be here with those of you tonight who are able to join us. There are many, as it's already been said, who are sick, who are at home this evening, unable to be with us. Several have even decided as well and over the course of this week that they may need to just stay home for the time being until perhaps case numbers can start to come down, if that's even possible, out of fear for their health. And we just do our best to respect them in their decisions and do our best to continue to encourage all of our brethren each and every day. But I'm glad for you who are able to be here tonight. We are in the book of Acts, the 16th chapter. Acts chapter 16, where we have been on this journey with the Apostle Paul, where we have seen his first missionary journey and then beginning into his second missionary journey. He has made his way from Antioch on into the regions of Galatia and Phrygia, but he was not permitted to go into the cities or into the region of Asia or into Bithynia. Instead, along that road, though being told, he received some sort of vision that is often referred to as the Macedonian call. So he's going to go into the region of Macedonia. He's going to go into areas such as Neapolis, Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, and then on down into Athens and into a few other places before making his way back over into that Asia Minor, working his way back to Jerusalem, then on home. So we noted the Council of Jerusalem, the message that he received there about circumcision already, and we noted several of those things along that journey that he would endure and make his way through. Then when he came to Philippi, we noted the conversion of Lydia, how unique it was with the fact that as he was going along into the cities, he'd often go to the Jewish synagogues. But when he comes up to this point, does he find a synagogue that he's able to go to? If he does, we don't read about it. In fact, we read unable to find that on the Sabbath day. He goes and he's learned about these women who would meet beside the river to pray. Women who were devout of their faith, who he's going there to preach and to teach with them. And so as he does, we learn of Lydia's conversion as well as her household. Following that, we know of some of the difficulties that he had faced shortly after that. And one of those difficulties that he faces is there's this woman who is said to be possessed by what? By a demon, right? And so with her being possessed by a demon, he and it's causing this great stir amongst the people, and she's crying out that these men are bondservants of the Most High God and proclaiming the way of salvation. She's starting to get a little bit on Paul's nerves, so he cast out that demon. Her owners, the people who are making money off of her, how do they respond? Yeah, they were mad. They've lost money. Now they're going to make a claim. And they're going to claim not that, well, we've lost some income because of him, but rather this man, being a Jew, he's thrown out our city all into some confusion here. He's caused clamor, and he's teaching some unlawful customs, trying to bind them on us as Romans. And the people immediately respond in an uproar, in particular the chief magistrate. They're tearing their clothes off, and they're shouting. They beat him with rods, and they throw them into prison. And if I remember correctly, that's about where we left off last time, with some of these things taking place with that conversion. One of the things that we noted that was pointed out a couple different times was who joins Paul, Silas, and Timothy in Philippi. Who likely joins them based on the change of wordage up until that point. Luke. Because you start to see how we did this. And then it changes to they. And then it begins to take a shift just to Paul and Silas. And we begin to wonder, well, what happened to Luke? What happened to Timothy? Why is it just Paul and Silas now? Well, remember, they're the two main names on this journey. And likely, Paul or Luke and Timothy, they likely would not have had to face some of the difficulties, at least, that the others were facing. So we look in at verse number 22. And someone read for us, not verse 22, starting in about verse 25. Remember, Paul and Silas, they've been thrown into prison, into the inner prison. They're not getting out. Their feet have been fastened into the stocks. Someone read for us from verses 25 through 30.
Multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates rent off of their clothes and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely. Who, having received such a charge, thrust them into the inner prison, and made their feet fast in the stocks. And at midnight Paul and Silas prayed, and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them.
Keep going to verse 29.
And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundation of the prison was shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bands were loosened. And the keeper of the prison, awakening out of his sleep, and seeing the prison doors open, he drew out his sword, and would have killed himself, supposing that the prisoners had been freed. But Paul cried with a loud voice, saying, Do thyself no harm, for we are all here. Then he called for a light, and sprang in, and came trembling, and fell down before Paul and Silas.
All right. So we note up to this point what all has happened. How were Paul and Silas treated? How are they treated up until this point?
They were beaten.
Yeah, beaten, dealt with harshly. How else?
Inner prison, thrown into prison with their feet in stocks.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't just we're going to throw you into a jail cell somewhere. They're locking them up, stocking them in, throwing away the key, it seems, and then God interferes on their behalf. They've done nothing wrong. And how does God interfere here?
There's an earthquake.
Yeah, there's a great earthquake, chaos there. Their chains or their shackles, the stocks, they're loosened. And that jailer, he's a little bit worried, right? Why would he be worried?
A little bit.
Yeah, a lot of it. He's ready to take his own life because of this, right? Why is he worried?
Because he's responsible for all the prisoners.
That's right. He walks up, the doors open, and logically, they must be gone. And getting ready to take his life because, as the custom would be, if you lost prisoners, what would happen? Custom was they would kill you. That was the likely punishment, unless you got off easy and you were beaten and thrown into jail yourself. But most likely your life would be taken. And so, rather than go through that humility, he is ready to take his own life. And what does Paul say?
Do yourself no harm. We're all here.
Yeah, stop. Don't do that. We are all here. And so we left off there, the jailer shouting to turn on the lights, bring in the torch or two, and he goes and he sees Paul and Silas there.
We don't know what the feelings were of the other prisoners, do we? But weren't they surprised, you think, too?
Yeah.
With their supposing they thought they had freedom too, but we don't know what happened to them.
Well, we don't. We assume they stayed. Likely, perhaps, through the praying and singing that they're done, and then they put two and two together. Something happened immediately following some of these prayers or songs. They probably would stay just out of fear of Paul and Silas, if nothing else. So
They might have believed also, but we have no record of it.
that's right. But we do know what's going to happen with the jailer there and his household. That's coming up here in just a moment. Because the man, he falls before Paul and Silas, and we didn't read verse 30. He brings them out and he says, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" I was in a study with a few other preachers, it's been several weeks ago now, on this very chapter of the book of Acts. And Nick Wood had asked, to be saved from what? What is this man asking to be saved from? He said he had heard through the grapevine of other older preachers at one point how one suggested that maybe he's asking, what must I do to be saved from the Roman government, from Caesar, from losing his life in that way? And then Paul responds with the only true salvation that anyone could have. Others are suggesting, well, likely if Paul is praying and singing and he sees how these men just keep their faith in what they were teaching to begin with that got them there, that he's asking because of salvation because of that. What are your thoughts?
You have to assume that the jailer was sleeping, because that's what the Bible says.
Right. He was asleep.
When all this started happening. So I don't know if you heard Paul singing or not.
Well, maybe he heard him before he went to bed. I don't know. The earthquake happens, though, and when that happens, he's asleep, and maybe that's what wakes him up. Well, we don't know what really awakes him. He just gets up, and then he finds them there. So what all does he ask? What do we think when he asks, what must I do to be saved? Now, Paul answers, and maybe it's just inferred based on the answer that Paul gives, based on Luke's account here, that when he's asking what must I do to be saved, is he's asking about true salvation.
He said they commanded him to keep them
Safe.
securely in jail, so he may have known what was going on, and he knew what they were teaching, maybe.
Maybe so. That's another thought of it. He knew about it before they got there. And so now he's asking, because he knows that this has to be an act of God. And if God is on his side, I need to get a piece of what he has.
Well, verse 32, when we get to it, is going to shed some light on it.
That's right.
They have to do further teaching.
Mm-hmm. So the man, the jailer in his household, they didn't know quite what they needed to know just yet in order to have salvation. But they're going to find out. They're going to find out. So let's go ahead and move on from there. Let's read some more. Someone read for us, starting in verse 31, read through 34.
But they said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved, you and your household. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed the stripes. And immediately he and all his family were baptized. Now, when he had brought them into his house, he set food before them, and he rejoiced, having believed in God with all his household.
All right, so we see a great conversion, really a mass conversion there. And we can think back to the household of Lydia. Whoever the head of whatever household you had was, if they went all in on something, the whole household usually joined in with them. There's a lot of weight in the authority figure, whoever that was, and what they said and what they did. So the household, they themselves also believed. So think about some of the things that had happened. Back in verse 18, they had been preaching and teaching perhaps many days at that point. Perhaps this man heard along then. We know for certain now in his own home, he's being taught specifically the things that he needs to do. He's told in verse 31 that he needs to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. He and his whole household needed to do that. We don't read of just repentance in and of itself. That seems to be implied perhaps even by, look, you've taken us into your home. You can't keep us in your home and let us go our merry way. That would be wrong. Take us back. So he washes their wounds. They go back into the jail cell. We're going to note what happens to them, or what happens the very next day here in just a moment. Because again, all this seems to be happening at nighttime because of 35, right? When day comes, all right? So we note baptism there. Baptism being immersion in water. I like the word that's used in verse 33, immediately, right? Immediately he was baptized, meaning there was no delay. They're not dragging their feet behind. Saved from what? What were they being saved from? What was baptism for?
Same thing today.
Same thing today. For the remission of sins. They needed their sins to be washed away. Why doesn't he bring that point up specifically here? Well, we know why he doesn't. Because he doesn't have to. He's already said it multiple times. It's one of those inferences that we can have as we continue on. Sometimes he brings up that point. Sometimes he doesn't.
You know, as many times, and I'm an old man, I've read this and heard it discussed, but I just learned something tonight that I hadn't thought about before.
What's that?
When he carries them into his house to feed them, evidently he puts them back in prison.
Yes. He takes them back in.
After all this teaching and baptizing and feeding them, then he puts them back in prison.
And there's rejoicing. You know, that was the right thing to do. Even though they were dealt with wrongly, that's about to be vindicated. He probably had no idea, but assuming based on the acts of God that have taken place, he knew that they would be vindicated in some way. And they were.
Well, he probably spoke up for them too, don't you guess?
Oh yes, he's going to send word back. You know, there's going to be this conversation that's about to happen with the magistrates, and they're going to come on their knees, groveling at Paul's feet. Maybe grovel at his feet's a little strong, but they're going to plead with him here in a moment. And so what else can we assume? Because based on verse 40, which we haven't gotten to just yet, though.
But Paul could have possibly asked to be put back in prison.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But we can also assume that these people would be taught all things, right? Matthew 28 teaches us that we, upon that belief, teaching them to observe what? Everything that the Lord had commanded. And we can take that, assume that to be true, because when we get to verse 40, when they go out of the prison, they depart, right? And so Luke, and perhaps even Timothy for a time, remains there in Philippi, which we'll come to that here in just a second and talk about it some more. Look at verse 35. Now when day came, the chief magistrate sent their policemen, saying, "Release those men." And the jailer reported the words to Paul, saying, "The chief magistrates have sent to release you. Therefore come out now and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us in public without trial. Men who are Romans have thrown us into prison, and now are they sending us away secretly? No, indeed. But let them come themselves and bring us out." So the policemen reported these words to the chief magistrates. They were afraid when they had heard that they were Romans, and they came and appealed to them, and they had brought them out, and they kept begging them to leave the city. And they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia, and when they saw the brethren, they encouraged them, and then they departed. There was still some work that was left to be done, that they needed to take part in, that they needed to take care of as far as Paul and Silas go. and that was encouraging some brethren. But note some of the things that happened along that journey to that point. What word did the magistrate send to the jailer the next morning?
Let the pressure go.
Let him go. Turned out they didn't have the right, or really the authority, without a good trial, to throw them in jail, right? And so they're, let's not do this. Let's get them on out of there. Let's do it pretty quick. And did Paul have any of that? No. He's going to pull out his Roman citizenship card, which he's going to do later on when he's going to appeal to Caesar when he wants to go and see Caesar. So here, his answer is no. Rather, let them come to us because we are Romans. Send that message back to them. And what do the magistrates do then?
They were afraid.
They're scared. They are scared to the court. They come, and I said, on their knees, just groveling at their feet, begging, pleading, right? We don't read that they're on their knees, but rather they do plead. They fall before them and plead with them to leave the city. Are they ready to go just yet? They still had, like I said, they still had a little work to do. What do before they leave the city? They go to Lydia's house. Lydia, a new convert, her household full of new converts. Hey, maybe even the Philippian jailer, maybe they're over there now too. We don't know if they are or not, but I imagine as new Christians, you would say, look, there's some more new Christians a street or two over. Go visit with them as well. That's possible. We don't read of that, of course, so I'm not going to bind that. I'm just speculating there. But what do they do when Paul and Silas get there? What do Paul and Silas do? They encourage them. What might be some of the things that they would say? How might they encourage the new brethren?
God's on your side and it'll all work out. Just keep being a Christian.
Paul's going to write a letter back to the Philippians, to these Christians, right, that are starting here in Lydia's home. He's going to write back to them. And when we read their letter, do we read of a lot of wrong that they did? Mm-mm. This is a group that rejoices. This is a group that's going to endure the hardships that they needed to endure. And
we Paul very proud of them.
Mm-hmm. And we read a lot, even about this, how Timothy's come back and forth, it seems, from Philippi. Likely Luke, based on verse 40, they went out. They encouraged them, and then they departed. Verse 1 of chapter 17, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. So who is likely left behind at this point? Just based on the wordage. Luke for sure. Maybe Timothy has been left behind at this point, and at some point will join them in Berea, because Timothy's name is nowhere to be found right now in Thessalonica until we get a little bit later on in one of the letters. I think it's in 1 Thessalonians 3, how Paul would send Timothy back to Thessalonica to check on the brethren. So we don't read of Timothy just yet. He may be with them, and I will leave that room there, that he may and likely is with them. We are just not reading of him at this point. So where does Paul go as soon as he gets into Thessalonica? Why? Why go to the synagogue of the Jews?
Because there's an audience there he can teach.
Yeah, there's an audience there. Daily, it seems, as the custom has become, Jews are always in the synagogues. There are people there that he should be able to relate to. Why might he be able to relate to them? He was a Pharisee of the tribe of Benjamin. He himself was, still according to his heritage, a Jew, but has now become a Christian. These are people he should be able to talk to. How is he going to be received overall? Some will believe, but it seems that he really upset some brethren, some people there in Thessalonica. Because the Thessalonians, when he goes on to Berea, those Jews that he upset, what are they going to do? They're going to chase him. They're coming after him. They're on a witch hunt at that point. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit. Let's read some. And according to Paul's custom, he went to them. For 3 Sabbaths he reasoned with them from the Scriptures. So one question I've had is, well, how long has he spent there with the Thessalonians? Well, at least 3 weeks. Perhaps longer. We know for sure he spent 3 weeks in the synagogues, or 3 weeks on the Sabbath day preaching to these people. Maybe longer, we don't know. But look what he says he does while there, laboring with the people in Thessalonica. He explains and gives evidence that the Christ had to suffer and had to rise again from the dead, saying, "This Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ." So what does Paul preach to the Thessalonians? Jesus, him crucified. And does he stop there? He had to rise again, the resurrection. So that was his burden. That's the message he's preaching everywhere. Other than Athens, his message is a little bit different, because in Athens, what are they focused on? All these different gods. So his message in Athens is about the one true God and what that one true God did in sending his Son. So we'll get to that here in a moment as well. Keep reading verse 4. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women. So some believe. Jews, Greeks, maybe proselyted, we don't know, and prominent women within the city. What does it mean at this point when he's saying that they believed? I think it's implied, and I may be wrong in that.
They were saved according to what the Bible teaches.
Right. That's what I take. I'm taking it for granted, at least. That's what's implied up to this point. Because if you're going to tie someone as a believer, then clearly up to this point, they need to be following the process. He's emphasized the process up until this point. He's going to emphasize the process again very soon, but Paul is moving so quickly from place to place. They believed, he's chased out of the city, he preaches in the next city, they believe, he's chased out of the city again and sent on to another place. And he will be chased out of that city as well in a different manner. So let's keep going here. Someone read for us verses 5 through 9.
But the Jews who were not persuaded, becoming envious, took some of the evil men from the marketplace and gathered a mob, set all the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some brethren to the rulers of the city, crying out, "These who have turned the world upside down have come here too. Jason has harbored them, and these are all acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying there is another king, Jesus." And they drove the crowd and the rulers of the city when they heard these things. So when they had taken security from Jason and the rest, they let them go.
All right, thank you. So now what's happened? The Jews who did not believe, what did they do?
Stirred up the crowds.
Stirred up the crowds. Where was Paul, based on what we just read, where was he likely staying at, or where did they assume he was staying? The household of Jason. And so Jason is drug out to the streets, and then he is arrested overnight. He makes his pledge. They release him. And what happens? What happens beyond that? Where are they going to send him? We didn't read verse 10, but where are they going? Yeah, he sends Paul and Silas away immediately, by night, to Berea. So what are we going to learn off of that? They take Jason, they take some of those people from his home, they're treating them very poorly, quickly throw them into jail, or at least taken to a place. They make their pledge, they make a payment to the people, they get out, whatever happens there, and immediately that night, well, we got to get you out of here. Otherwise, it's going to get real bad. And so they're going to go to Berea. And the Bereans, they're going to be a slightly different group, right? Let's read some about the Bereans. Immediately, they sent Paul and Silas away by night into Berea. When they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Now these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the Scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. Therefore many of them believed, along with a number of the prominent Greek women and men. Let's just stop there for a moment. It was just a few, some who believed back in Thessalonica. How many believed here in Berea? Many. Why? Why the difference? I go back to verse 11. We have a more noble-minded group. We have a group who are searching the Scriptures out daily, and after hearing this message of Christ, they're putting 2 and 2 together, and they're coming up with 4 every time, and they understand what is being said. So that's a testament to good Bible study, isn't it? That's a true statement about the importance of us studying the Scriptures so that we'll be ready to hear what the Scriptures say and not be blinded by just some personal beliefs. That's what they compared the teachings of Paul and Silas to.
My Bible says they were fair-minded.
Fair-minded. I like that. They were fair-minded. Very good. Let's keep going. Where are we? Verse 14? No, we didn't get to verse 14. We left off in verse 12, going into verse 13. Guess who's coming? Thessalonican Jews who didn't believe, right? He says in verse 13, when the Jews of Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea also, there they came as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then immediately the brethren sent Paul out to go as far as the city, and Silas and Timothy remained there. So, who at some point has joined or has been with Paul this whole time? Timothy. But who is going to remain in Berea? Silas and Timothy, Timothy and Silas. They're going to remain. So when Paul makes this journey now, I have not moved our slides forward, have I? As Paul makes this journey now from Thessalonica to Berea, he's headed just a little bit to the west, southwest. He's now going to have to go all the way south to Athens. He's going to go by sea, by a boat, and go likely through that nation way there. And as he makes his way on into Athens, he's all by himself, minus some people who would be accompanying him just in general up to that point. So why leave Silas? Why leave Timothy? Why leave Luke?
Well, it might not have been fully Paul's decision.
Okay, it might not have been his
Then
decision.
immediately the brethren sent Paul away.
Mm-hmm. So the brethren send him.
And like they were more concerned for his sake than maybe the other two, Silas and Timothy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also want to add this side of it too. Why leave Luke? Why leave anybody behind at different points? There may have still been more work to be done. In Paul's name, who are they coming after all the time? Paul. I can leave these guys behind for a little while. They'll rejoin me, come back. We read of that in the book of Philippians, how he sent Timothy back and forth. We read it in the Thessalonian letters as well, how he would send these guys back and forth. So it's not wrong to think of it that way. There was still work to be done. They still needed to do some work in those cities. But here, in this particular instance, in verse number 10, verse number 10, the brethren were the ones who sent him away. And that's important. The brethren saw what was happening specifically to Paul, and they want to get him out of there. So we keep reading, or not verse 10, wherever we were at, verse 14. Now those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens. So although the brethren are just sending out Paul, are they sending him out completely by himself? No, he still had a company. It's just Silas and Timothy, they're left behind. Now those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and receiving a command from Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they left. So when he gets to Athens, what happens? He's left alone, isn't he? Why is he left alone?
Given over to idolatry.
Well, yeah, he's in a city that's given over to idolatry, but why is he left alone in Athens? What did he tell this caravan that he was a part of to do?
That's a little bit difficult the way it's written. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And after receiving a command, who was the command from?
I'm thinking it's from Paul. I may be wrong, but that's who I'm thinking it's from. They've received a command to go back and get Timothy and Silas. Why? Come as soon as possible. Why? He needs it. Think about the end of Paul's life when he's longing to see Timothy again. Think about when Mark becomes useful to him. He needs his brothers with him. He needs the guys that he has set out on this journey with to go hand in hand with him. Yes, there was work to be done. Yes, it may have been a part of his plan. It was a part of God's plan or the people's plan for these other guys to stay behind. But Paul knows that the work needs to go on. And these guys are on this journey with me. Needed them to be hand in hand with him. So he's in Athens. And while in Athens, do as the Athenians do, right? You see all the art. You see all these monuments. And does he stop there? In fact, when he sees all this stuff, it enrages him. He's provoked in the spirit. Because all that he sees is not, look at all these wonders, look at the art. What does he see? Look at this city full of idolatry. So he goes to the synagogues, to the Jews, God-fearing Gentiles. He goes into the marketplace every single day. And then he comes to the Epicureans, to the Stoics, to the point where they begin asking questions of, what in the world is this man talking about? What is this idle babbler trying to say? Look further, he says, he seems to be a proclaimer of strange deities because he was preaching what? Jesus and the resurrection. So what is he preaching to the Jews, to the Greeks, to the philosophers of the day, to these idolaters everywhere and anywhere. Jesus and the resurrection. So that means Jesus and Him crucified, this message of the gospel. And they took Him immediately and brought Him to their Agapes, or I can't ever say it, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is which you are proclaiming. For you are bringing some strange things into our ears, so we want to know what these things mean." So these people, the Athenians, the strangers visiting there, they use their time for nothing more than to hear and to tell something new. So what is he getting at this point? What is Luke trying to tell us? When these people come up to him, they're laying hold of him, taking him up to the Areopagus there. They're going to take him up to the top of the hillside of Mars Hill, and they're going to hear this man speak. Why? Because that's all they live for, is a new teaching, is a new way of life, a new philosophy. Well, they're not going to like,
Well, was that not a good trait in one aspect?
in one aspect it was.
Instead of stopping the ears, if I don't want to hear that.
That's right. They gave him the floor. They gave him the
Like
floor.
the Jews did,
Like
stop
the
the ear.
Jews.
I don't hear that.
We don't want to hear that. The Philippians, the magistrates, we don't have any time for this. It is a good trait in one state, but to know a little more about the Epicureans and the Stoics and their beliefs, I don't have them all before me, but some of the things I read, it wasn't the best trait for them. But it does give him the floor. And what is he going to do when the floor is given?
He started with what that they were familiar with.
He starts.
Their idols, their gods.
That's right. He starts where they're at. This is a group of people who is so obsessed with the latest god or the latest trend, the latest thing. I'll meet them where they're most familiar. I will tell them about the one true God. That'll pin their ears back. Well, it will. And then some will also be a little perturbed about that, to the point that they are ready to get rid of him, to send him out of there. And we're going to note some of that, Lord willing, next week. Any other questions up to this point before we get into the sermon on Mars Hill next week?
We don't really know how long it took for Silas and Timothy to get there, do we?
No, sir, we don't. Because, in fact, they're not mentioned again. Chapter 18. I don't think they're mentioned again until chapter 18. They're not. Chapter 18, verse 5 is the first time we read of them. That when they came down from Macedonia. So they were still up there through his stint there in Athens before he makes his way over to Corinth. So they're coming. We just don't know when or how long this is taking. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, well, Lord willing, we'll put a peg there for our Bible study next week in chapter 17 and verse number 22. Acts 17, verse 22. Lord willing, we will pick up there.